So just to kind of dive in, we're going to talk about flounder or flatfish. And you can see they have eyes on only one side of their head, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as they mature. So flounders, or aka flatfish, they have a variety of different names. So you may see them at your local fish market as just listed as flounder or sole. I highly recommend that when you go to a local seafood market, you actually ask what type of flounder it is. A running joke in my family is that they always have on the seafood market lemon sole. And so my mom thought that meant it was lemon flavored flounder. And I said, no. So, some people don't know. So yellowtail flounder is called rusty dab. Winter flounder can be called blackback, lemon sole, or George's Bank flounder. Summer flounder are also known as fluke. American place is dab. Witch flounder is gray sole, and window pane flounder can be called sand dab or sand flounder, and I'll go into a little bit more of that. And so tonight's seafood sample, again, will be with Chef Ben Porter from Viera on Maine. And we're gonna be having a Panko Almond Flounder with Herb Mayo. I'm very excited. So on your seats, you'll have a copy of the recipe, and I just wanted the chef to kind of briefly talk about how you prepare this dish and any important tips.
I think when working with flounder, it's important you can dry it out real easy, it doesn't have a lot of fat, and it's real thin. So usually at the restaurant when I'm cooking flounder, I'll actually roll it up, and I'll add some sort of crispy topping so you can get some texture on it. I find if I try to saute it or try to get some texture to it by itself, it just kind of falls apart on me. So this recipe, you'll see it when you taste it. It'll stay moist in the middle because there's actually multiple layers of flounder. And then we use the Herb Mayo, adds a little fat to it, and then the panko topping adds texture.
And so just to kind of thinking about when you're at a seafood market about buying, how do you know what's fresh? How do you recommend storing it in your fridge? Just kind of any kind of tips for defrosting if it's in the freezer?
It's like any other whitefish. You want to look for the color. If any of the bloodline, or it doesn't have much of a bloodline, but if there's any red in it, it's more fresh than even if it starts to turn brown on the edges, and also just to make sure it's a nice opaque and it doesn't get, or not opaque, sorry, translucent, and it doesn't get too opaque, meaning it's old or frozen. Yeah, because it's such a delicate fish, if you're gonna put it on the grill, you wanna have it on aluminum foil, or however you're gonna cook it, because it is so delicate, you're not gonna wanna move it around too much. That's why I prefer baking it. That way you can just pick it up with the spatula. If you try to saute it in a pan, it'll work, especially if you have larger, thicker fillets. That lends itself well to sauteing, but usually for me, the smaller the fillet, I'm gonna tend to bake it so it doesn't fall apart on you. 350 is always a good temperature for any whitefish in the oven, and it depends on the thickness. So if you've got really thin fillets, it takes maybe 10 or 12 minutes. If you've got to roll it up and you're using bigger portions, it might take 20 minutes. It all depends on the thickness of the fillets. So we have, I believe this is yellowtail flounder. It came in super fresh. It looks awesome, so I'm excited to try it as well. This is a dish that we do at the restaurant on occasion, because we can get nice local. It's one of the few fish we can get that's local, so we like to highlight it. So this is typically how we would serve it at the restaurant. We would take shrimp and chop it up and fold it into the orzo. A caper beurre blanc adds a nice flavor. The capers are bright and acidic. Green beans is just a nice pairing that doesn't overpower the fish. So a classic French technique is sole meuniere, where you saute in a pan with butter and lemon and capers as well. That's always a real popular one with shallots. That's something that we've done over the years that I've always really enjoyed.
And so I know many of you all said that you eat flounder, but nutritiously it's a really good source of lean protein, provides B12 vitamin D, selenium, iodide, and omega-3 fatty acids. And so now I'd like to welcome up Captain Bill Amaru and Captain Jason Amaru. Come on up.
Well, I'm Bill Amaru. I'm a commercial fisherman, been fishing here out at Chatham. It started in New Orleans in 1969, 1970, a long time ago, and came up to Chatham in 1974 and been fishing full-time from here ever since. I've had a couple of different roles in fisheries. I worked for a while as a management person, serving on the council. Now I'm on the Massachusetts Commission, but I maintain a living as a fisherman. My wife, Joanne, is right here. I'd like to introduce her. Behind behind almost every commercial fisherman, you'll find a strong woman who makes sure that he gets out of bed in the morning and has something to eat while he's out on the water and provides clean clothes. Anyway, so we've been fishing on the Joanna. I've had 4 different iterations of the fishing vessel Joanna. The latest one is the one that Jason now owns. He's been my crew for the last 15 or 20 years. And starting about 5 or 6 years ago, Jason took over ownership of the boat, and he operates it now as a trawler and as a scalloper. And historically, the fishery that we pursued was done starting out with hooks and lines, which everybody did in Chatham in the earlier days, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. Then we started using nets. And eventually I broke away from using fixed gear gill nets to using a mobile gear net, a trawl. And I found that to be a little bit more opportunistic. We could move to different places and fish in the same trip, unlike what you do when you set a gill net on the bottom. You're more or less anchored to that location for the trip. And we also have varieties of fish that we could catch that you can't catch in these other kinds of gears or as effectively. So we've been trawling, pulling an otter trawl on the ocean floor. Now the flounder is, yeah, there's a couple of good flounders, aren't there? Okay, now we were talking about the names earlier, and that's just a very, very small snapshot of the kinds of fish. There are over 600 species of flounder, and the order of flounders is, now this is going to be on the test at the end, so pay attention. Pleuronectiforms, okay? And the nice thing about these animals is they live in so many different varieties of environments. The fish on the left, that's my son Jason. We're out at sea here, east of the Cape, between here and George's Bank, and that's a pretty decent halibut. Probably, what do you think, 50, 60 pounder?
Yeah, 50 pounder.
Yeah, it was 50 pounder. We're allowed 1 a trip. Has to be over 41 inches. They used to be very prolific, and their population is responding to conservation measures. We're seeing more of them, but we're still only allowed 1. It's going to be 41 inches long. So there's an ocean full of smaller ones. Now the fish on the right, that's my grandson, Christian. That's Jason's older boy. He's the 3rd generation of this group fishing, and they're in Nantucket Sound on the right-hand side, and that is a summer flounder. Happens to be a particularly big one. In fact, it was only 2 pounds off the state record. Yeah, that's a really, really nice fluke, summer flounder. So they're both in the same family. You can see there's a lot of similarities, and as Aubrey mentioned earlier, they start off life in their earliest stages before they become, maybe as big as a penny, with both eyes on either side of their body. And then as they spend more and more time on the bottom, evolution has caused both eyes to migrate to one side, the top side. Obviously, if they were on the bottom and there was an eye on both sides, they'd be constantly looking at the floor and up above. So they're smarter than that, so they figured out a way to have both eyes looking above where predators will be more likely to be found. Now you notice how white the bottoms are. This is another interesting thing about this particular fish. The bottom of the fish, when it comes off the bottom to pursue prey, anything that is below it will be looking up at the light. The white, therefore, acts as camouflage from below. The dark side, or the upper side, is just the opposite. Looking down at it, it blends in with the bottom of the sea. So it's a dark brown or sandy colored. And these animals have the ability to change their spots, you might say, very much like squid and other kinds of arthropods. They can change their colors. And they do that, second question on the exam, or with cells called chromatophores. Okay? I want to make something about the resource in its population. Now, almost everything that we fish for, except for dogfish and skates, populations have declined over the decades. We started out fishing, there'll be some pictures coming up, of us fishing in Nantucket Sound back in the 70s and 80s, and we were catching fluke and blackback flounder, winter flounder, in numbers that are really remarkable. So this is the fishing vessel Joanna, Jason at the helm. This is the crew out in the back. That's Jim Bremser, for anybody who's wondering who that is. And over on the other side is a picture of the net coming in, being pulled in by that reel. That's the operative force that brings the net up. We do a lot of fishing in the dark, especially for flounder. There's something about the conditions on the bottom of the ocean during darkness that allows us to catch flounder at a greater rate than during the daylight. So we're out this morning getting ready to set the trawl. What you're seeing there is Jason lowering that trawl door. That's one of the planes that brings the net to the bottom and spreads it apart. It's basically a vertical airplane wing. Instead of producing lift, it produces outward force which pulls the net apart and keeps it spread onto the floor of the ocean. This part of the net, he's closing the cod end now. That's a tripper, it's called, and that's what keeps the net closed. And when we pull it back onto the boat, because it might be filled with thousands of pounds of fish, you snap the rope and it opens up, and the bottom of the net, which is puckered when it's closed, opens up and the fish drop down onto the net, onto the deck. And the net is wound up, as you can see, it's about 150 feet long, and it has an opening that's about 60 feet wide. The thing about pulling a net like this behind the boat, there's so much force exerted by those doors. There are tools, and they're rather expensive. We don't have them on this little boat. That'll tell you when there's a lot of pressure, but we do it by time. And you learn that by simply going out and fishing and understanding how many hours you can pull or minutes you can pull the net. These tows run for about an hour and a half on the bottom. We go 3 knots when we're towing roughly, so we're covering a pretty good distance. But again, it's a fairly narrow swath that we're covering. Here it is being pulled back in after being set out. Now the sun has come up, you can tell. And there'll be a few fish in the twine as we're working our way down to the cod end, and then the cod end itself will come in. Now when the net is fairly heavy, we can't lift it in with the power of the drum because you don't have that much force. But in this case, we were able to just make it, yeah, he's up and in. Okay, and now he'll put the stern boards in.
So what does the stern boards do?
The stern boards simply close the back of the boat. You know, the back of the boat, you can see, is open. It's like a tailgate. He puts the boards in, and now we have the ability to drop the fish onto the deck, and they won't go spilling back out. And the net will have whatever we've got for that first tow of the morning. And how about that? That is a lobster trap. Now, don't get the idea that we towed somebody up. What happens is the guys lose their gear. You know, sometimes a rope break or you don't know exactly what might have happened. That was an unmarked trap that happened to be laying on the bottom, and now
That's when we were tagging the halibut.
Oh, we're tagging now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, this is a trip where we're tagging fish and then releasing them. We were doing some research. And halibut was the target fish that we were tagging.
But this is what, like Dad said, we had towed the net for probably an hour and a half, and bring it up, empty it, and then set out again and make another tow. And while we're towing the second tow of the day, I go through what we caught on the first one. And you can't keep everything that's there because there's no market for some things. So we throw them back. And then there's regulatory discards that we can't keep some things by law, so we have to throw them back. And the target species that we can keep hopefully are worth enough money to make a profit at the end of the day. So this is just the process of me going through what we caught. So you can see we catch a few lobsters, you catch a few scallops, you catch a few fish, and then
A little at a time, it adds up.
yeah, you got to put in some time to make a profit if the fishing is so-so. Sometimes when it's red hot, you can go out there and load up on a real valuable species quickly and come in and unload. And other times it takes 2 or 3, well, I don't fish for 3 days, but I do 2-day trips sometimes, and you can make slow fishing profitable that way if you're efficient enough.
All right. Now the picture on the right is a picture from Nantucket Sound back in the 80s. And all those fish in the forward, closest to the camera, are blackback or winter flounder.
Yeah, these were the ones you saw in the very beginning that were laying down looking at you.
Yeah.
These are those
And
ones.
they were prolific at that time. Today, there'd be very few. And there are a lot of reasons why that is, but we just don't have them like we once did. We do have other species. Gray sole is a that's really what made our living for the most part. It was a fish called a gray sole, which you won't see marketed on Cape Cod or very rarely. The chef would know about it because that's the kind of thing that it's a white tablecloth, what they call a white tablecloth fish. Goes to the markets in the restaurants in New York City, Boston. You'll see it in the Russian tea room, at least when it existed. And there we are tagging a small halibut. Yeah. And our biggest threat right now to the growth of fish and long life is really environmental. The things that we see at sea with temperature changes are just remarkable for such a short period of time. The last couple of decades is just, I don't even know where to begin to describe it, but it's huge. Yellowtail flounder is a local Cape Cod flounder. Now, the chef that was here a little
Ben,
while
yeah.
ago mentioned that he thought it was was local, but this fish was probably landed in New Bedford. The boats that trawl out of New Bedford fish on Georges, where these fish are very numerous.
Or Boston. There's a lot
Yeah,
of Boston
Boston
draggers now.
draggers too. But there's a lot less activity with trawling, which catches most of these flatfish, because that's the net that's on the bottom. There's fewer of us. There's just, the boats have gone out of business, been bought out, all kinds of problems. If you've been reading in the press, a major company just folded up and went back to Denmark, where they were from.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to show us.
I wanted to say, as far as management and conservation, Dad was saying that this type of gear has been, advanced to reduce bycatch and have a reduced environmental impact. And on the management side, if you're going to try to fish for these now, you need to have an observer. You need to have a person on your boat on every single trip, 100%. And which the government's paying for right now, but when they stop paying, the fisherman has to pay, and it's kind of a contentious thing. You have the option of putting a camera on your boat that's going to run 100% of the time that you're fishing, because they want to see what you're catching and discarding. And the last thing I wanted to say was, when you saw the net hanging in the air and I opened it up and you could see that there was those square mesh shapes, that's what the net is made out of, square mesh. That's so small fish can escape out of the net before they come up to the surface. That's the largest size by law. That's the largest size mesh of any managed fishery in the world, is what we use in New England. The 6.5-inch square mesh. No other, even we fish next to Canada, and they use, I think, a 5.5-inch
And they're allowed
cod
to
in.
keep
And we're
smaller
fishing
fish.
side by side for the same thing. They're on one side of an imaginary line, we're on the other, and we have a 6.5-inch mesh, and they have a 5. So we have a very aggressive management, and it's hopefully paying dividends, because it really kind of puts a damper on our productivity. But that's
Say something about
Can you
the
talk
prices.
about the difference between square and diamond mesh? I just think that's always kind of fun for
yeah,
flounder
you can
versus.
tell them about the prices, how they have
Well,
gone up.
everybody see this flounder here? Barely, but because those,
Chromatophores?
yeah, they change color, so it blends in with the bottom. Now, if this was gravel and had dark pieces of stone, these would be darker. But this fish is shaped like that, like a diamond. When you're towing a net that's got diamond-shaped mesh, I mean, it's literally diamond-shaped. It's shaped like that. A diamond-shaped mesh will allow a flatfish out easier because it fits between the extended diamonds. Whereas a square mesh net, which is literally square, is designed for escapement of round fish, like cod, haddock, and other kinds of square. So we use a combination of these meshes for the advantage of the fish to get out of the net. You'd think you'd want to do it the other way around because you'd catch more, but we're trying to rebuild the stock and get the highest quality, the larger fish. They pay a little more money for larger fish.
Yeah.
Winter flounder.
So they got a really small mouth compared to a lot of flounders. So because they have such a small mouth compared to those halibut or fluke, they mostly eat worms, shrimp, clams. They are found, pretty much. This is an availability chart. So in green is when it's available on the Cape, Massachusetts, January through March. But you can tell that that's another species you would see very common at the fish market.
Yeah, and that the seasonality is changing very,
Yep.
very quickly. We're seeing summer flounder earlier than we ever have before. They're staying fairly late. We're getting black sea bass up here, which used to be in mid-Atlantic and more, southern Georgia, Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland. Now we're getting them up here in big numbers because they're going where the temperatures in the environment is most suitable for them. We're losing our cod and our other cold water fish, winter flounder. We don't have the numbers we once did. And the predator and prey relationships are changing. We're getting greater numbers of animals like sea robins. I don't know if anyone's familiar with sea robins, but they feed, when these guys are in that stage, they're an inch less, the sea robins, they feed on them, and they really can clean out. Sea robins go in enormously dense schools, and they just cover the bottom, and it's vacuum cleaner time. They just clean them right out.
Do you target certain times a year, like you're going for yellowtail or dabs, or is it just kind of whatever flounder?
There's definite seasonalities to them, yeah.
Yep.
We used to start fishing for yellowtail in October, and we fish right through the winter, right on the backside of Nauset Beach, a half a mile out to as far out as we would find them. So it was the winter fishery, because in the winter, when the wind is blowing hard from the west, northwest, we can get up close to the beach, and we can still be in relatively calm conditions for fishing.
And this is the witch
So
flounder.
witch flounder this is the fish that we made our livelihoods on for the most part in the last couple of decades.
What does it look like when you flip it
That's
over?
the gray bottom, so it's called gray sole.
And they're in a very specific bottom habitat. They're on a kind of a silty, muddy bottom in deep water, although they do come into shoal water, maybe 180 feet is shallow for us, where they spawn and lay their eggs, and then they go back into the deeper water, 600 feet, 700 feet. They have no problem with that. That's where they live.
And then this is the summer flounder, so that was that picture on the right when you were looking at those two big flounders that they were holding up.
Well, the interesting thing about this character is the direction of his jaw. Most flounders' jaws go to the right, looking down at them. The fluke's jaw goes down into the left.
And also notice it's a left-eyed flounder, not the right-eyed, like from
And
the other
right-
pictures.
The eye
So this
follows the
one-
same pattern.
These are the only flounder that is kind of showcased tonight that has teeth, except I think the halibut has teeth.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But the other 3 or 4 species, they don't, if they have teeth, they're minuscule.
No, I mentioned earlier that everything was hooks until we started using the net that we drag. One of the reasons that we didn't need to use anything but hooks, because we caught cod and haddock in huge numbers in the earlier years. Notice the size of this. Well, this is a fluke, so it does have a pretty good sized mouth. You catch it on a hook. But the blackbacks, the gray sole, their mouth is no bigger than the pinky nail on your finger.
Tiny, yep.
Try to find a hook that'll, and,
Yep.
and get the bait small enough. So as a result, we use the net, and it works very effectively to catch them.
And then window pane.
Have you seen, you guys have seen some of the nature shows when you see a grouper, when it opens its mouth and it sucks stuff in. When its mouth opens up, it's it's as big as, almost as big as the diameter of its body, but that's not the case with these flounders.
And this fish, we're not even allowed to possess it anymore. We can't even have one on the boat because they hit one of those declines. No one understood really why that particular species just seemed to disappear, but it did. And they're now recovering. We're starting to see them again. But there's a name for them, and it fits. They're very, very thin. They're delicious to eat, but you got to have a really, really good knack for filleting fish to get much meat out of these guys.
Yep.
Or fillet 20 of them to make one meal.
So is there a difference between taste of different types of flounder?
Yeah, just from personal experience, and if you've had the different species, you can probably taste it too if the fish is fresh. I think if it's not fresh, you might lose that ability to differentiate, but the yellowtail has a flavor that's, no other fish has that. And, I taste that also with haddock, cod, same thing. If it's fresh, you get to, and you eat it enough, you get to identify each flavor. At least that's the case from my house.
We have a local organization called Chatham Harvesters, and they work strictly with our local boats on the Cape to provide you with the freshest fish that you're going to be able to find. And they don't have a market per se. They do what are called pop-up locations, and I'm sure it's mainly through the internet that you find out this information. But if you Google Chatham Harvesters and contact them, you'll be assured of getting Jason scallops, our halibut.
Yeah, they buy summer flounder from me in the summertime, and then they buy more than they can sell. They have a really high quality commercial vacuum sealer, and then they freeze it. And then that's one of the best ways to freeze fish is with a vacuum sealer. I personally find that when you freeze it in a Ziploc bag, it doesn't taste as good when you thaw it out as it does when it's fresh.
Don't be afraid, though, to seek out high-quality, fast-frozen fish, frozen at sea especially, that would be coming from foreign countries. In Western Europe, they do a wonderful job with their at-sea freezing processors. They have big ships over there that fish quite differently than we do here. It's really more of an industry that's often government-supported and even government-run in countries like Norway and Denmark, Iceland, and they do a wonderful job. So if you can buy a frozen at sea product and you find that it meets your standards, don't be afraid to use that. It's not going to help us too much, but on the other hand, our prices are so low for what we catch and what we put into our work. It's hard to equate to what's going on, but I can tell you the prices that Jason got this past summer for gray sole when he was fishing in the fall were the same prices that we were getting in 1999 for our fish. $1.20 to $1.60 a pound is all we were getting. Now that has to be filleted, there's waste and there's handling and all the rest, so we know the price is going to go up. But for us to be getting the same prices, and people say, well, why is it that way? All I can say is that the market for our fish pretty much disappeared during the really, really severe times of cutbacks by the fisheries service, and we weren't allowed to catch the fish. And when that happened, the purveyors and the people who market the fish to you, the general public, sought an alternative supply. And they sought that supply mainly from Europe and Alaska and Iceland. And those supplies are still available, and they're portioned, they're frozen at sea. It eliminates the need for keeping the fish cold in a refrigerator and hoping that you're going to sell it within 2 days, because that's really as long as it will last and be in really good shape. So we've yet to crack back into that marketplace of the fresh New Bedford style or Boston style filleted fish.
But definitely try to get more, fresh flounder if you can at the market, of course, if you need to get frozen. And, if you don't have a vacuum sealer at home, and you do have to use a Ziploc bag, I found sometimes, even if it's slightly different taste by thawing it, I'll put it with Italian dressing, just, salad dressing, and put it in there for a little bit. Immediately takes out any kind of fishy smell. You won't taste it on your regular fish, and then can do your normal seasoning as is. So just a little bit of that oil and vinegar kind of removes any potential fishy smell I do with anything. So that's always an option if you had to freeze it until later.
We have an ice maker on the boat, and it makes a ton a day of saltwater flake ice. So once
See the ice on the
once we wash, we clean them. After I sorted them, when you saw me doing that, we put them into these totes, and then we put them down into our cold fish hold below deck, and we put saltwater ice on top, and the fish hold much colder than it is outside.
So
And
you don't call it frozen then?
no, this
Oh,
is
no,
not.
it's not
No,
frozen.
this is not frozen at all.
This is called
No.
slurry ice fish.
No, you could take these fish right out of the tote and fillet them right now in this video here. But frozen is frozen, and these are fresh. It's different.
There's 100 pounds in each of those containers, roughly. There's a shovelful ice on the bottom, a shovelful on the top, and they are cold. And they stay fairly cold. They're going into the building now. The building isn't air conditioned or anything, but it'll stay on a tray for maybe 3 or 4 minutes till the men put them in additional totes or containers that also have ice on them. And then they go directly into a refrigerated truck, and the truck will have those fish either in New York, Boston, or New Bedford within 6 hours.
Dad's been fishing since before I was born, and I went to I fished with him here and there during high school. I didn't love it very much, but he needed the help sometimes, so I went with him, and I needed a little money, so I ended up going to college and working overseas, and I didn't really like being gone, and I had family. And then Dad needed a crew, so I started full-time with him in 2000, I think. And the rest is
Lo and
history.
behold, he discovered he liked it more than he thought.
Yeah, and I got my son. My son works with me full-time, too, now. He was the kid holding that big fluke. He's been with me for 3 years now, I think.
Yeah, these are quotas, and
Yeah.
these are the size limits.
Yeah, just helpful to see the size. Sometimes people don't know.
Yeah, well, we when I started fishing, size limits? Well, there were no size limits. There wasn't even any mesh size limits. You just bought the gear and you went and you caught the fish. And if you caught small fish that day, you kept small fish. I mean, there'd be a point at which you wouldn't keep them, but now you have a 12 inches on the Georges Bank. Is this blackback here?
Or yellowtail, yeah,
yep.
winter.
This has jumped around. It used to be 13 and they decreased it to 12. What we try to do, this is from my years on the council, we try to match the size of the fish to the gear that retains those fish. You don't want to have a size limit that doesn't match up with the gear, because you're going to kill all these fish. You're going to have more fish. So you bring the size to match to what escapes from the net or what's retained by the net. And different fish in different sizes, shapes, get out easier or differently.
These are
we call them doors. They're called otter boards. And they pulled an otter trawl. This is an old rendition of what they once looked like. These are called bridles that go from the lower and upper part of the net, because the upper part of the net has lift and it's up in the air. So the bridle allows that to spread.
This only works if it's moving. I don't know. So you guys so you guys know, that's what Dad mentioned at the beginning. There was fixed gear, which is what a lot of the Chatham fleet started out historically doing with hooks and gill nets. Well, hooks and then gill nets, which stay in one place and the fish come to them. This actually herds the fish. It doesn't work unless it's got headway. So you're actually overtaking the fish, and you're only going 3 knots, 2.8 knots. So you're not outpacing the fish, but you're tiring them out. And once they get tired of swimming in front of the net overtakes them, and then they go into all the way in the back where that cod end is that I opened up.
My mom always used high quality virgin olive oil, and she would egg wash the fillet and then dip it in Progresso seasoned breadcrumbs. That was probably 75% of the times that we had fried fish.
That's it.
And that remains probably the most popular recipe. But we do a lot of broiling too. You feel like you've had enough oil earlier in the week, put it on a pan underneath the broiler. High heat, very short time. As soon as it turns golden brown on the top with mayonnaise and dill. Got to use dill on
Always
your fish.
dill.
With mayo. As soon as you get a golden brown on the top, do not overcook the fish. It really, you want it moist. It's like boiling an egg. It's the white protein of an egg is the equivalent of the protein of the fish. It doesn't take very much to cook it. I mean, the chef had a recipe, but that was because he had done something with the fillet. He had other things involved with it. But if you're doing just the fillet with a little bit of mayo and dill, as soon as it's golden brown at the top, bring it out.
And also you can
Serve it.
use a fork and it'll flake, and that's how you kind of know as well. Thank you guys, and just wanted to mention too that this Meet the Fleet event, we get supported by NOAA and the National Marine Fisheries Services through their Saltonstall-Kennedy Awards.